Okay. So I'll do a brief introduction. I'm Jackie Eastman. I am co-editor of the Journal of Consumer Behaviour with my co-presenter, Steve D'Alessandro. He is a professor of marketing at Edith Cowan University in Australia. He's published in journals such as Journal of Marketing, European Journal of Marketing, Journal of Business Research, IMR, JRCS, among others. As it's only a 30-minute webinar, I cannot list them all. and he's also published 12 books. And what we're going to be talking about in this 30-minute session is this is the type of things that come up in a Meet the Editor session. So we wanted to go over some of those items. We're going to focus on the first point, making the case for the contribution of your research. We're also going to stress the need for multi-study research, talking about how to strengthen your methodology, what needs to happen with your discussion, understanding the journal requirements, what a good cover letter can do for you, how to handle transfers, and so forth. I'm going to turn on my, can you all see my presentation? Steve, can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Okie doke. Thank you. So what editors are looking for, they're looking for manuscripts that add to both theory and practice. And even journals that traditionally have been seen as much more theoretical, even they're starting to ask for managerial sections. And so you want to make the case for how you're building on theory and where does your research fit in and what research is grounding your work and how you're adding to that, as well as what does it mean for managers. And a lot of times, a mistake sometimes people make is they go, oh, well, there's this gap and I'm filling this gap. That's not enough. You need to make the case why that gap needs to be addressed. Also, something you want to do is, a lot of times we start our papers off, start our projects off by looking at the literature. And so we write that part up first. But then by the time we've done a few studies, it could easily, a year or so has gone by. And so you need to go back and re-examine the literature because there may be articles that have come out that are really relevant for your research. So you want to make sure that lit review is up to date. Now I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk more about making the case for the contribution.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes. Okay. So the first thing to remember is that when you're making a contribution, the contribution can be is a combination of three things, as shown as the triangle there. You can make a contribution in method, like a new methodological approach, a new analysis approach, and so on. You can make a contribution to theory, introducing a new theory, integrating a new theory, or context, artificial intelligence. Either one of those is sufficient, but not enough for you to make a contribution to a good journal. So you need to be thinking about how does my paper make a contribution in method, theory, and context? And ideally, you can see where the diagram comes, and take it from me. This is from Ladink and Stewart from Journal Academy of Marketing Science a few years ago. It should be in the middle. You need to make that contribution clear. The other thing that should be aware, if we just go back one slide, Jackie, before we go, is your contribution continuum. And you need to be at least a 5. In other words, a straight replication or doing a study in another country, or just an extension of a new theory may not be enough for many marketing journals these days. So you need to be looking at developing a new theory, identification of a new phenomenon, and developing a synthesis integration for your paper to be considered in upper level journals. Okay? Thanks. Next slide. Thanks, Jackie. Okay, now contribution, it's subjective. However way we look at it, you try and do your best, but in the end, the decision of your contribution comes down to the editor's opinion. They usually are the final decision, and also the reviewer's opinion. And you can see here that if you draw a little matrix here, that your clear rejection will be when both are low, and a clear acceptance will be when both are high. Contributions can be evaluated both in terms of extent of new knowledge, which we call an absolute contribution, so introducing a new theory, or a relative contribution, importance compared to existing literature. As you move up the journal hierarchy, the extent of new knowledge becomes more important. You've also got to be aware that contribution, by its nature, is subjective. So if you get a rejection because your contribution is not significant, it's partly because you may not have explained it, but it is significant. It is a subjective assessment. Thanks, Jackie. Next slide.
Oh, can people see the slides? For
Can
those,
see slides? Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So
Yes, can see.
okay. Good.
Okay. So next slide. Okay. So 3 domains of contribution: conceptual, explanations of phenomena. So it's not enough to say AI is really, artificial intelligence is really interesting. You need to offer an explanation of why it's becoming accepted or not. New approaches to study phenomena. So for example, recent article in Journal of Marketing on research with quasi-experiments, difference analysis. Substantive, which is the new context of phenomena. And the important thing is it's got to be relevant to the journal's audience. You must read the aims and objectives of the journal. For higher ranked journals, you need to make a contribution in 2 of the above. The third thing to be, the final thing which I put in bold there, not all papers that you will write, or that Jackie and I write, make fantastic contributions. Be realistic about the level and type of contribution your paper makes. If you're not sure, get another academic or close colleague to look at your work before you submit it. Okay, Jackie? Next slide. Now, the other thing that helps contribution is the element of surprise. So contributions that have a surprise or counterintuitive findings, journal editors like, because this is really a major progress in scientific inquiry. Unexpected results or new perspectives can significantly enhance the value of research. Now, be very careful about presenting non-significant results to do that. Generally, the view of a lot of reviewers and editors is your research may be underpowered or you may not have done something correctly. If you are making that case, you have to be very careful about your method. So elements of surprise, and make that clear early in your manuscript, will help your paper be put on the review pile. Okay, next slide, please. So focus really on the theoretical and practical contribution. So innovative methods. So I'm using, so that we've seen a lot of studies on fuzzy logic, what else we've seen, Jackie, systematic literature reviews and so on. That's insufficient these days. Gaps in the literature. Not all gaps in the literature, though, are important. Why are these gaps important? You should be able to go to a dinner party or explain to your partner, so what? Why is this important? Avoid context-specific findings without broader implications. This is hard in qualitative work, but what we mean is just because a study hasn't been done in a particular country doesn't make it, doesn't really make a contribution. How does this particular country relate to other countries? And this is really why we're moving down the path of and many journals are, of multi-studies. Okay, next slide. Might be me. Let's have a look. Okay, so Jackie, this over to you now.
Okie doke. So to build on what Steve said, a manuscript that has too narrow a focus does not make as strong a contribution. And so you want to make it, aim for research that is generalizable and not specific to a certain region or a certain product domain. And for the authors, the burden is on you to make that case. You want to start up with your abstract because that's the first thing everybody reads, in which you answer, this is what we did, this is what we found, this is why it matters. Just saying, oh, there will be theoretical and managerial implications discussed in the paper. What's the key takeaway? That introduction, positioning the research. This is what's been done. This is why we're doing it. And this is why it matters. And then finally, in your discussion section, this is what it means for theory and how we have contributed to theory. This is how we contribute to practice. And a lot of times a single paper is not sufficient for making that kind of level of contribution that you need. And most A journals, there's still a couple that will go with a single study, but most A-level journals have transitioned to a multi-study, ideally multi-method approach in the past few years. And so a single study paper may be desk rejected. And by adding more studies, it enhances the generalizability. And I've had people go, well, I'm doing a survey, so how would another survey help? Well, it could be you're doing first a student sample, then you're doing and building on that model with a national sample or in multiple countries. It could be a qualitative study followed by a survey, or adding a qualitative piece after a survey to get a better understanding of what the results mean. It could be multiple experiments. Even a systematic lit review could benefit from a second study to take it beyond that descriptive, this is what's been done, to add, say, a qualitative piece where you contact those thought leaders in that field and where do they see the future, to sort of build on what needs to be done next. And when you do these multi-studies, though, they need to relate to each other. They can't just be, oh, I had a single study paper on rejected from this journal, a single study paper rejected from this journal. Let me try to put them all together in one paper. They've got to organically relate to each other. In terms of the methodology, and I know people go, well, wait a minute, how am I going to fit all this with the word limits? Appendices are your friends, especially to provide that level of detail and to be able to do multi-studies. At JCB, we recently upped our word limit to 12,000 words because the idea of being, if we're asking people to do multi-studies, we realize that can be hard to do with a very tight word limit. But in terms of the methodology, it can't just be we recruited X number of people. How'd you recruit them? Where did you recruit them from? What exact measures? And this is where, give us the scales you used, whether in the paper or within an appendices. If you adapted a scale, how did you adapt it? Because sometimes people use the term adapted and it's a very minor change. Other times people use the term adapted and it is almost like they've rewritten the items. So you want to make that clear. If it's qualitative, what were the questions asked? What were the follow-ups? If it was an SLR, what was the screening process? The reader should be able to, if they're like, ooh, I like this study, I want to build on this, that they should be able to replicate the study. And again, if you're worried about word count, appendices are your friend. Also, more journals are asking for the data. Now, I know for some universities, if you put your data in a public repository, your institutional review board will will get very upset. So at a minimum, make the data available upon reasonable request and make that clear when you submit. In terms of the discussion section, this is where, as an editor, sometimes when I read a paper, I can feel your exhaustion coming out in that discussion section. I think sometimes authors feel like I'm almost there. I just got to punch out a few more pages and then I can submit it. I would discourage you from doing that. Instead, what I would recommend is if you need to take a day or a weekend away from the paper, do so. And you want to finish strong, because this is where you're really making a strong case for the contribution. You'll want a summary of key findings. You don't want to rehash the results, but a table of the hypothesis, were they supported or not, what paths in the model were supported would be helpful. You don't have to relive the results, but maybe just a little bit of a summary. Then go into your theoretical. How does it relate to the theory that's grounding your research? How does it contribute to the literature? And then for the managerial, based on your results, what does managers take away? What can they do based on this? What are your recommendations? And you want to make sure that the recommendations are not so overgeneralized that they're not specific to your findings. And that's sometimes a mistake people make, is that they think, well, based on this, you could do this, 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 or this. And it's like, well, did you study all that? So keep it very clear and specific to your findings. If there's a public policy implication, obviously have that. And then with the limitations, there is no such thing as a perfect paper, but you need to be upfront with those limitations, because if you don't mention them up front and a reviewer can see them, they're going to think that you're not being, upfront. So you want to spell that out. Here's the limitations, and make the case for why you're still, it's still a contribution, but then also offer future research. So where does someone who wants to continue work in this field, where do they go? Then you want to have just a very brief conclusion statement, a summary, whether it's one sentence or a couple sentences to finish strong. And so again, I can't stress enough, take the time to write a good discussion, because that's really going to help make your case. When you're thinking of what home to send this to, what journal, make sure your research fits the journal. Make sure you're following those guidelines very specifically. Before an editor gets a paper, an editorial assistant with that journal will get the paper. And if it doesn't fit the guidelines, they'll unsubmit it before we even know your paper exists in the system. And so you want to make sure that you're following that guideline, because otherwise it will get returned to you before we ever get it. And if you're not sure about the guidelines, what I would do is I would email the journal office. If it's something that they can answer, they'll answer it. Otherwise, they'll direct it to the editors to provide the answer. You want to read articles from the journal so you're familiar with the type of research and the style. While you want to make sure that your research fits in with the journal, some people will make the mistake of, I'm going to overstuff sites. And so you'll start seeing a bunch of that journal's articles cited in future research, but it's nothing from that journal's been discussed before. That's a problem. What you want to look at instead is, organically, what articles are you using? What journals are guiding? What's the grounding theory? What are the measures? Where did they come from? And use that organically to decide, okay, my article could fit in these journals. And finally, you want to make sure your paper is very clear. Have someone other than you or your co-authors read the paper. Because if someone else reads it and they go, I don't understand what you're saying here, I can guarantee the reviewer won't understand it either. Because a lot of times as we're writing it, it's sort of that Gestalt principle. We're filling in what we know, where a reviewer or an editor, if they don't understand it, that's going to inhibit your progress. And make sure it's very clearly copy edited. I would recommend having a good cover letter. You can make the contribution for your research and why it fits that journal. So you can say, this work builds on, and talk about where it fits in with previous things done in that journal. Also, if there's any issues. So if it was part of a dissertation or you had submitted it and presented it at a conference, let us know. So if anything gets flagged, with Authenticate or Turn It In, we can know why. If you have done multiple articles in a research stream, sort of make that case. Because if you've done multiple articles in the same domain, you'll probably have a little higher Turn It In Authenticate score than someone that's never written a paper in this domain. So explain how your paper differs from what work you've done before. If you do anything at all utilizing AI, spell that out explicitly. So if you used AI, even if it's just with Grammarly, spell that out. So if that gets flagged, we have an explanation for that. Now, sometimes a paper might get rejected, and you'll get the opportunity to transfer it to another journal by the same publisher. And sometimes people make the mistake of going, okay, transfer it right now, but they don't improve the paper. Well, one, you may get the same reviewers. And I'll tell a personal story here. I submitted a paper with a co-author, and it was rejected. And the reviewer said, you really need another study. So we conducted the other study. One of our reviewers was the identical reviewer. So that very first review with the new journal, they said, oh, I like this version so much better. The addition of the new study really helped it. So we knew it had to have been the reviewer from the previous journal that said, you need a new study that examines this. And it got published. So, and if there's issues being raised, whether it's by the associate editor or by the reviewers, it's not going to be like, oh, well, our reviewers don't care about that issue. They're going to care about that issue. So you want to improve your paper, take that feedback, improve your paper, and then in the cover letter for the transfer, say, based on the feedback we received from this journal, here's the changes we made. Because, part of our perspective when we see someone that hasn't made any changes is that a paper from when it's submitted to when it's accepted and going through the whole review process, that's about 40 hours of labor. And the vast majority of that labor is unpaid. And so why should we tax our reviewers if you're not willing to make the needed changes in advance. And plus, by making those needed changes, it will enhance your probability of success with the new journal. But you want to make sure you meet the requirements of the new journal. So if one journal rejects you because they don't do single study papers, make sure that the journal you want to transfer it to, if they don't accept single study papers, it's going to get desk rejected. So you want to make sure that it fits the requirements and that you've improved it. So to wrap this up, research takes a lot of work. You know, Steve and I have been doing this for a while. There's no secret sauce. It's a lot of work. We're hoping with these tips that you try to don't make the mistakes that I've made. So to help you, and then hopefully you'll get out for review, and then it's up to you to use the reviewer's feedback to improve the paper. And again, some of my biggest successes are papers that were rejected from one journal. I took that feedback and improved it. And sometimes I've even gotten it into higher level journals using that feedback. But one thing, if you do get a revision, you want to make sure to clearly address every point of the reviewer. If you're unclear, ask the associate editor or the editor. If you disagree with it, don't just say, I disagree with it. Make the case in your letter, in your response to reviewers. I'm a firm believer that every manuscript has a home, but you want to make sure that you find the best home for your work. We greatly appreciate your time, and we have kept this pretty close to our 30-minute time limit because we know everybody is busy. We have our contact information, but we can also open it for questions. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to take a quick photo of everybody. If you wouldn't mind putting on your cameras real quickly. Okay, so we'll go with that. If you wouldn't mind putting on your cameras and okay. Are there any questions? Oh, okay. Are you special issues? Are you recommending or the
Yeah.
with the review process, I think most journals are really starting to tighten up with special issues. The idea should be a special issue follows the same, guidelines, the same level of rigor as a regular submission does. And so I think the only difference is that they're trying to curate a number of issues on a certain topic, but it should follow the same level of, there's always that thing, oh, special issues are easy to get in. And I think that's no longer true. I think most journals have tightened up there. Oh, no worries if you weren't able to turn on your camera. Any other questions?
Professor, I have one
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Thank you for the wonderful session. It was very informative and a lot of things we have learned. So my question is, I'm from marketing side. So my question is, now the world is going to the AI. Like most of the people, they are working on the secondary data. They are data mining the big data, and then they are using in the research. But we say we see in the most of the journals, the marketing journals, still people rely on the primary data. Like we are working on the surveys, experiments. So what is your opinion? What is your experience? In future, should we still keep focusing on the primary data, or should we move to secondary data, and how it is more related to the marketing? Because we often measuring the behaviors of the consumers. So how it can be helpful in the future? Thank you.
I think whether you
Wow.
use primary or secondary, I think it depends on your topic area, and it also depends on where you can get the data from. So if you have access to secondary data that's real consumers, that's worth its weight in gold. And I think that's where the idea of maybe doing, multi-method. So if you say, okay, let's look, because a lot of times with some of the secondary data, if you can get it from industry, it may be several years old. They're not going to give you last week's. It may be several years old. So it may be, do that qualitative with marketing managers as to, what do they see the future of in that topic? And so that might be a fit. But I think a lot of times as marketers, we're sort of limited by budget and where we can get our data. So I think that's and what your topic is. So I think if you can get good secondary data, I would encourage that. And you may want to think about, how do I complement that with another study? If you don't have access to good secondary data, I don't think that's the kiss of death. I think there's other ways of sort of tapping into it. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Professor.
There was also a question about the video. If you go to higheredsig.com, and I'll put that again we're going to post this video. It usually takes them about 2 weeks to post the video. We'll also have our research grant competition coming at the end of November for doctoral students, and our special issue with SLRs for doctoral students and research recent graduates for the winter AMA, the virtual session. So you don't have to go to Arizona. Okay, so what pre-registration? Okay. I don't think I'm following the question. Okay, let me see Erica's question. Okay, pre-registration of experimental study questionnaires. Ooh.
So I can answer that,
Okay.
Jackie. So, okay,
I don't do a lot of
Erica.
experience.
Yeah. So this is a new approach coming from psychology, that you pre-register the experiment and you say, this is what we expect to find. And generally what the social psych journals will do is they will allow you to go through the review process with the experiment in mind. Now, we haven't gone down that far, but pre-registering an experiment is a really good idea. So that you can go back. If the reviewer said, oh, you're p-hacking, or you did this or you did that, you can point to the fact you pre-registered the experiment. So it is good practice. Anything to be more transparent about your method and your data is a good idea. Okay, does that answer your question, Eric?
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. Can I add just one more question in addition to that? Because I've been getting mixed suggestions and advices from my colleagues and co-authors. I had colleagues saying that because I mainly do experimental studies, I usually have multiple studies in one paper. So a couple of my colleagues were actually suggesting that as long as you pre-register one of those studies, it will be fine. But there were also colleagues suggesting that you need to pre-register basically all experimental studies that I would be including in the paper. So I was a bit confused. That was basically the background of my question.
Yeah, look, it's not a requirement for a lot of marketing journals I know at the moment, but I think we're moving this way because there's a huge concern, as you know, about data fabrication, p-hacking, and so on. So pre-registering is probably not a bad idea, but then you've got to look at the workload that creates. If you've got 6, 7 experiments, so I think you would balance the workload with the outcome out there. But I certainly would recommend the open science framework approach. It's free, and you can point to where your data is. I think the biggest issue, rather than pre-registration, is the access to data. So somebody can go in and say, okay, does the data make sense, and so on. Now, there's a bunch of people now called Retraction Watch and Data Collider, and they're going around checking findings. And where the findings look a bit unusual, they'll ask for the data. And you don't want to be part of that approach. So, yeah, the reason I like Open Science Framework gives you a DOI, document object identifier, and so you can point to that. All right. I think it's good practice, but I wouldn't do it for 8, 10 experiments. All right. So just do it when it's reasonable. Your main studies, for example.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good questions. Any other questions? Oh, we got a new message.
Any advice for purely theoretical conceptual papers? Wow.
Well, when you look at the Academy of Academy of Marketing Science has marketing
review.
The review, and that's pure, and all they want is conceptual papers. So I think that would be a good home, and they'll reject anything that has data in it. I've been to enough meet the editor sessions with them. So
Ma'am,
yes.
ma'am, your tips very helpful for editor task, ma'am. It is very really nice. But I have one doubt. What is your advice for write a financial case report, ma'am?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
Repeat, please. What is our advice for? Sorry,
Financial case report.
Yeah. What is our advice for?
Oh, maybe type it in the chat.
Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, the audio quality is not great.
Okay.
And then if anyone else has any questions, if you want to type those in the chat, okay.
Oh, any advice on mixed method quality and quantity is something JCB. Yes. I think that good qualitative work, and some of my better papers have both, is a really good idea because the qualitative gives you the richness of the data, and it can often explain empirical findings you've found. So you can do the before or after, but I certainly think I'd like to see more mixed methods papers in the journal. I think Jackie's nodding her head as well. All right. So yeah, good idea. Look, it's harder to write multi-study papers, let's be frank, but I think qual and quant seems to be a nice marriage, right? Rather than trying to do 6 experimental studies and link them all. Okay. So yes, good idea. And by the way, a qual study could also be social media analysis of a phenomenon. So if you were looking at luxury consumption, you might do an analysis of social media posts about a brand or something. Doesn't have to be interviews, okay?
And even if you're a pure qualitative person, you could do 2 qualitative studies, one with consumers, one with managers.
Yes, or a social media and qual would be a really, so, and interviews would, I've got colleagues who do that, and it's quite good because the social media gives you the generalizability from the in-depth qual research. So that's a really neat design that we'd like to see more of. Oh, everyone's really quiet.
Okay.
Ask any question you like. We're not going to be offended. So, you're on mute, Don. Yeah,
Can I
hi.
ask the questions?
Yep, of course.
Yeah, yes. I'm quite familiar with GCB in the role of a reviewer and also authors. Yes. Yes. So I just see your new informations. GCB will not welcome the systematic review paper anymore. But how about a meta-analysis study? Is it possible for me to submit to GCB?
Okay. So what we're really saying, we're not saying we don't want them. We're saying we want a bit more rigor in them, right? So what we're finding, and what a lot of other editors are finding, is they're very descriptive. So a meta-analysis could be good, but you'd have to say what the results mean, right? So what we're finding with systematic lit reviews is so many theories, so many this is counting exercise. So we've really tried to push the envelope out and say, why don't you do an additional analysis? So you could do an analysis with a small qualitative study, interview with experts or so on. All right. So a meta-analysis, if it's properly done, would be something we would consider. But I think getting back to the earlier slide, method itself is not a contribution. Okay. So you have to really say, how are you advancing theory and practice from a meta-analysis? Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Then we've got two other questions. One is it better to start with quant or qualitative? If you look at Cresswell's book, I think, people, if it's a brand new to you topic, qualitative might make sense before, particularly if you're paying for survey data or for people to be in your experiment. But I've done cases where I started with a qualitative, I've done a survey, and then I realized, I think this is what the survey is telling me, but I'm not exactly sure. And so then I end up, so I started with a qualitative with consumers, a survey of consumers, then a qualitative with managers.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so,
Right.
so I think it's just what works organically in your journey with your research. Also, we had a question, what is your advice in case of financial report?
Financial report. So do you mean financial data? Do they mean financial data?
Okay, I'll type that in. Or do you mean financial report in terms of the cost of the survey or cost of collecting the data?
Look, again, I think regardless of a method, and we often see this is a problem that people say, I've got this wonderful method, it solves everything. That generally is not a contribution these days. So if you're using, let's say we're using sentiment analysis in social media, and we're looking at trends of words people say, why that's interesting, and you might have 500,000 tweets. What's the theory? What's the contribution? The method is a tool, it's not an outcome in itself. So financial reports, if it's financial reports of firms, no, because we're a Journal of Consumer Behaviour. If it's a financial information that a consumer might have, that could be interesting, but what is the contribution? You need to be thinking about, how does this improve our understanding in the area, in the discipline of consumer behaviour? Not, here's a wonderful method, isn't it great? That's not going to get you up these days. And sadly, we see a number of papers which present, data mining approaches and so on that somebody talked about earlier, but there's no theoretical advancement of or generalizability beyond that data set, even though it's large. Okay.
And I think in terms of financial data, you can do things such as an event study where you look at stock prices, and that's been done forever in the finance field. But if you can relate it to a marketing event, then it may be of interest to a marketing journal. So I think financial data can be utilized if you can connect it to marketing. And I know sort of the first one that comes to mind with me is event studies.
Yeah.
Oh,
in the case of SEM, which is preferable, Smart PLS or AMOS, either, as long as, again, you're thinking about the tools, not the contribution here, right? Now, be very careful. We're getting a lot of SEM PLS papers with one study, and we're not going to accept those. Also, be very careful with your model. If it explains the obvious, people who are brand loyal are more likely to buy the product. Well, of course they are. That's why they're brand loyal, right? And so be careful that you're actually contributing, your results are contributing to the field. But our reviewers and our journal does not have a preference for any analytical technique or any approach. What we have a preference for, Salim, is the contribution you are making, okay? The contribution, and it needs to be in more than one area. Remember that triangle I showed you earlier.
But I think too, when you're utilizing your method, you want to make the case for why this is the best way to look at this data.
I
And
agree.
so if you get a very heavy quant reviewer, they may ask you, if you did it in PLS, run it in AMOS. But I don't think that would be why they would reject a paper.
No.
And I've had papers where the reviewer had their preference and they said, run the data with this way. And if you feel very strongly that, no, I picked the way that makes sense, then, this is where you have a really long response to reviewers and say, I ran it using your technique. If your results are robust, you should be getting the same results regardless of which technique you use. And then you could just put it as like a footnote within the paper that we also ran the data. But I don't think that would cause a paper to be rejected, but it's just something, different reviewers, especially if you get a very heavy quant reviewer, may have different preferences. Okay, would JCB consider business consumers? So I think B2B, I think you might want to look at Journal of Supply Chain, Journal of Business Logistics. That's really a much better fit than Journal of Consumer
Industrial marketing, yeah. Yeah.
In which, it could be an excellent paper, but there's also excellent B2B journals, industrial marketing management, where they would love, especially if you had real business people in your data. Any other questions? Well, good evening to those of you where it's evening. Good morning to those of you that it's morning, and have a wonderful day. And for those of you where it's in the middle of the night, I can't thank you enough for
Thank you.
Giving us your time. And again, please look at higheredsig.com and follow both JCB as well as the higheredsig.com so you don't miss any of the latest happenings. And thank you all so much. We greatly appreciate it.
To AMA South Africa. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Nathaniel, see you.
Thank you.
Okay, all good, Jackie.
Okay, I think we're still recording, so I think it's gonna stop when I stop it.
Right.
But thank you all for coming, and thank you, Steve, for
No worries.
all your contributions. I greatly appreciate it.
Well, yeah, good fun. All right, Jackie, I'll see you later. Bye.
Bye-bye.